Bipolar disorder is an often misunderstood disorder due to the stigma associated with it. Welcome back to another episode of the Mental Health Break. Today's episode features Saba Malik, who considers herself blessed with bipolar. Saba shares her personal struggle and experience with bipolar disorder and addresses the stigma with mental illness within the Muslim community and the limitations it presents to those suffering. Hi, I'm Dr. Nafisa Sekandari, a licensed clinical psychologist specializing in anxiety-based disorders. It wasn't that long ago that I struggled with my own anxiety and had no idea how to manage it. But now I have control over my anxiety and overall mental health. I created the Mental Health Break podcast to give you simple, actionable, step-by-step strategies to help you do the same. Mental illness can cost you time and money. Ignoring your symptoms will only make the problems worse. Taking time out of your busy day to dedicate to improving your mental health can lead to long-term health and wellness. In this podcast, each week you'll learn tips, tricks, and proven strategies to help you regain control of your life, all while prioritizing your mental health. If you want to improve your life, regain control of your mental health, and feel empowered, you're in the right place. Let's get started. Today's episode is brought to you by the Transforming Anxiety course, an online, self-paced anxiety course to help you manage and control your anxiety from the comfort, privacy, and convenience of your own home. Learn how to transform your anxiety in just 6 short weeks. The course registration is now open. To learn more, visit transforminganxiety.com/course. I'm so excited to talk to Saba Malik today about her experience with bipolar disorder. Let me introduce her really quickly before I bring her on. Saba is currently an educator, life coach, and writer. Saba is also the author of 3 ebooks, one of them titled Blessed with Bipolar, The Muslim's 3-Step Guide to Mastering Bipolar. As a Muslim diagnosed with bipolar disorder, Saba's aim in her work is to give hope to other Muslims struggling with bipolar, depression, and anxiety. Given that there's so much negative stigma towards mental illness within the Muslim community, Saba faces a huge hurdle in her quest, but she continues to write and educate about mental illness. Let's bring in Saba and learn more about her struggle with bipolar disorder. Hi, Saba. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Nafisa. Thanks for having me.
So I just introduced you briefly and just shared a little bit about your struggle with bipolar. Can you share a little about what that looked like, at what age you were diagnosed with bipolar, and what were your symptoms when that made you want to go and get diagnosed? What were you struggling with?
I was diagnosed at age 19, and I always knew there was something going on, almost like there was a monster inside, but I could never name it. And it was around the time, like when I was going into university, that it started to flare up. And in the beginning, my family and we didn't know what was wrong. Of course, there was the default, oh, it's a jinn possession. We went through that route. And then, subhanAllah, my mom took me to a sheikh, and he was actually very intelligent. And he said one thing that I still remember to this day. And at that time, I was going through a divorce as well. So he had divorce and bipolar. So my mom was obviously, going crazy herself because of the situation. So the sheikh said to her, "Dear sister, the Prophet, peace be upon him, his own daughters went through divorces. They went through a divorce. And your daughter, right now, she's not possessed by a jinn. There's no, something like that. What you need to do is get her to a hospital." SubhanAllah, that's how it started. And that was just the beginning. And we just had no clue what it was. We didn't know about the term bipolar or mental illness. And it was such a wake-up call, and it caused so much pain that's really what motivates me to do this work. I don't want anyone else to go through that, go through that storm that I went through. So I do my best to just try to help people through that.
So for those that don't know much about jinn possession, in Islam, we believe that jinn are spirits that can possess a body. And there's actually evidence of them in the Quran and the Hadith, the teachings of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So for people that don't understand, that is a belief that a lot of Muslims believe, that some mental illness is attributed to jinn possession. But your family was wise enough to also take the medical route as well and rule that out. Did the bipolar play a part in your divorce?
It did. And I don't talk about it a lot, except that I bring it up to show that a lot of Muslims who have mental illnesses, first, just being in a relationship is really hard. And second of all, having a mental illness just adds another layer of, getting married, I was just looking into a research article. It was in the Journal of Muslim Mental Health. And in there, I found proof for what like I've been going through, which is that a Muslim who has a mental illness, people don't want to be associated with them, let alone go in a relationship and get married to them. So, yes, it played a factor, it played a role, and I'm not shy to say that. I don't bring up the people or anything. I don't think that has anything to do with it. I think it just highlights a very, very important issue and a problem we have in the Muslim community. So, I am open about that so that it brings awareness to the people who are suffering not just with a mental illness, but another added layer of not having the same opportunities as just normal people. So yeah, it played a role.
There's so much stigma in the Muslim community about mental illness, and like you said, being open to accepting marriage proposals or even wanting to get married and then having a diagnosis. I know one of the problems is a lot of people hide the mental illness in order to have a match and in order to get married. And then the other person feels like they were conned into the situation. I know, I mean, I can see both sides of that. Do you have any experience either with yourself or other people that you've worked with over the years? How can somebody that has a mental illness diagnosis go about actually finding a good match?
Yeah, that's interesting. The word being conned and that. What I went through the time I was getting married is the time I learned about my bipolar. So the first time I went to the hospital, the doctor said, "Oh, this is just because of stress and you're going to university and you have a lot of pressure. So that's why you have this flare up." Right? I didn't know the term bipolar. I was never told that. They just said stress. So during that time after when I got married, that is when it hit me that I do have bipolar, that this is real. And that is when I started taking action. Because of that immense pain, I learned that I have to do something with this, because if I don't, it'll keep coming back. So of course, maybe other people felt they were conned, but I felt like I just didn't know, right? And it becomes so complicated and mixed up. It's already a mental illness, but when you add other people to the equation, it becomes even more messy. And then I learned from that. So alhamdulillah, when I got married the second time that I talked to my husband, I let him know, "Hey, I have bipolar. Is that okay with you?" He's like, "Yeah." So I learned from that. And that's something I want to share with people who have mental illnesses, that be honest with your diagnosis. But Nafisa, that can only happen when the person knows that, hey, I have a mental illness. I have this diagnosis. If they never know, how are they going to tell other people? So I think that's where I think what you're doing is so good. Your website, I think it's great because it's raising awareness. When we don't know ourselves that there's something, I don't have a mental illness, I don't have bipolar, I don't have anxiety, how can we expect others to know? Right. So yes, always, know about your condition so that you can tell other people, because otherwise it is a disservice to them. But more than that, it's a disservice to yourself.
I think what you said is, if you don't know, I don't believe that that is a con. You had no idea. And some people might have thought, okay, I'm just under a lot of stress because going through the whole marriage process is stressful. But I'm talking about people that knowingly know that they have it and then they choose not to share because of the risk of not being accepted. It's great that your husband was open-minded enough. But I think one thing you said that was key is, once I knew, I took action. I did something about it. And that's the problem that I think a lot of people, due to shame, due to the stigma, they want to hide behind the mental illness and don't want to do anything about it because they don't want to admit or be seen as weak, or as sadly as it is. I mean, in our culture, people are considered crazy if they are diagnosed with a mental illness, when really they can get help and get treated and they don't have to suffer nor make the people around them suffer, correct?
Yeah, I agree with that.
The honesty, as far as when you told your husband, how has he supported you in your mental illness or with the bipolar disorder since you've been married?
Nafisa, I think the best way he supported me is, I remember telling him the first time when I shared my diagnosis with him. And the thing is, before that, when I would talk to other proposals or families, and I would share that, some of them were very honest. Hey, look, I that's not something I can deal with. My family can't deal with that. So I was grateful for that honesty. You know, that upfront, I know that that's great. With him, the first time he learned that, the support I got was like he was just baffled and he was like, "So, yeah, bipolar, okay. So what?" You know, he that is the best way I think you can support someone with a mental illness, that when they share that such a shameful thing that, you know, people keep secret, they share that with you and they trust you enough to be vulnerable. And when you let them know, "Hey, you're still the same person. So what if you have that?" It's like somebody having diabetes or somebody in a wheelchair. I'm not going to treat you differently just because you have that. So I think that's the best way he supported me, and he continues to support me. He doesn't see it as a disability. And even him right now, you know, doing this awareness, this work, it gets challenging at times. It's time consuming, and sometimes it's mentally challenging for myself to hear other people's story and to feel the pain. But he tells me, no, you need to do this because there's other people who are not at the point that you are. They need that help. So I think his biggest support is just normalizing it. You know, normalizing it that you're just like anybody else. So I think that's the biggest way.
And he didn't treat you like a patient walking around on eggshells or
Mhm.
making you feel bad. But I think being honest, you can weed out a lot of the people that are not
Mhm.
going to be a good match. So a lot of
Mhm.
people are afraid because they might be rejected, but you don't want to be with somebody that's going to treat you that way anyway, right?
It's a great filter. I find it's a great filter for friends. It's like, hey, you can't deal with that part of mine? Good. Thanks for letting me know. I'll move on. You know?
But even in the Western society, when you're dating, if you want children and you want to hide that fact
Mm.
because, or if you don't want children and you want to hide that fact just so that you can have somebody accept a marriage proposal or date you, that's going to waste a lot of your time. Just
Yeah.
lay it out there. I don't want to have children, or I want to work and I don't want to have to raise kids. I don't want to have whatever the issue is. Be honest and upfront so you can have authentic relationships instead of just finding somebody for the sake of finding them, right?
Yeah, I think that's very easy to say, Nafisa. Like I say that in my blogs and podcasts as well. But I think when you're in a family who's actually hiding your diagnosis, right? Oh, don't act like that outside. Oh, don't say that. No, you don't need to share your meds, all that, right? That person, because they feel that shame and that secrecy around them, they start to internalize that and it becomes like a self stigma. Like for myself, I was always into school and I was very academically talented and my grades were everything, right? Getting like A's and having the best GPA, that was my thing. That was my goal and everything. So when I first got that diagnosis, I was like, it can't possibly be true. I'm not dumb. How could I have a mental illness? So yes, it's we should share. Yes, we should let other people know, to be honest, but I think before that, we need to work on the stigma and the misconceptions, because I can say that to someone who has bipolar. I can say, you know what, you should let your boyfriend or your family or something, you should let them know. But if they have that deep stigma inside them, it doesn't click. They're just gonna hear me and then it's just gonna pass over them, right? They're gonna dismiss it. Like, how can you, Saba, possibly know what I'm going through? How can I share that? It's very deep and it's very ingrained. So I hope, doing a podcast like yours, it brings awareness and it normalizes these conditions.
Definitely. No, I know it's not easy. And it's such a
Yeah.
deeply ingrained thing in our culture that I think just being brave enough to even stand up and say something, like even for me, I mean, I had a medical condition. I was diagnosed with endometriosis, and a lot of family members are like, you should never say that outside the family because
Really?
people are going to assume the worst. It's like, I had nothing to do with that.
Yeah.
Hormonal disorders are genetic in my family, and I ended up
Mhm.
inheriting it from my mom. But there is that shame, and I made sure to let everybody know because, first of all, at that time nobody was talking about endometriosis. I'm so glad that people are talking about it now more and they're raising
Mhm.
awareness. But back then, even the doctors didn't really know how to treat it, except for surgery.
Okay, so you
So
have that experience. You know what I'm talking about.
totally no, and it's something that needs to be. We need to stop feeling shamed for things that we can't
Yeah.
control. And mental illness is like any physical illness. There's no shame around it. Just talk about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, and work like this, it needs to be done because this is what will normalize it. Like I call bipolar and mental illness the cancer of today, because 20, 30 years ago, cancer had the same kind of stigma, you know. So I think we're dealing with that now. So, but it's getting better. Alhamdulillah, I think COVID is a blessing because it's bringing to light all these mental health issues.
Well, it's going to be the next pandemic. The mental illness is on the rise because of COVID. And so we're going to be talking about it more, and hopefully people will feel more comfortable talking about it. But share with me a little bit about your journey to healing. What are some steps that you ended up taking to feel more in control of your bipolar?
I think the biggest factor in control is having spirituality in my life, and just always, and sometimes, that comes out as like kind of fluff, like, and I had that viewpoint as well, that how could, things like just pray more, or just, talk to Allah, or he will cure you. He can do everything. That kind of, in the beginning, I was like, okay, that doesn't really help me. But something happened which kind of totally changed the way I looked at mental illness and bipolar, which was I had the most deadliest suicide attempt. And Nafisa, I'm telling you, to the point that my mind, of course, was totally checked out. My limbs were numb, and I was very, very close to death. And it was very scary, of course. But the scariest part was I had no control over it. And at that time, usually, when you have, when people have suicidal thoughts and, depression, it's usually a negative voice. It's telling you, you're horrible. You should end your life. Like, of course, it doesn't sound that nice. It's actually way louder and it's a bigger storm. But in that attempt, in that episode, it was the first time the voices were cheering me on. They were saying, you're doing something great. Your family, they're going to love this. You're actually helping them. And that was the scariest thing, because naturally, of course, as humans, we want to preserve. We're all about survival. So how could something in my own head, my own body be telling me that this is a good thing? It's a good thing to end your life. And at that point, after that, or while I was going through it, I literally, like, a lot of people, like, I was like, what are you talking about? How could that happen? But I don't care about that, because this was my experience, and I know it was true for me. So while I was going through that, I literally felt myself like hovering above and watching myself go through that. And at that point, I was like, I can't possibly be hovering above. How can that be physically possible? And the only way I could explain it after was there was a higher power. There was some divine being who was watching over me. Because if you looked at that situation, like logically, physically, you would say there's no chance that you came out of it alive. So after that, before that, I always had like Islamic knowledge, the book knowledge. But after that, it became experiential. It was like stuck in my heart that there is a being, there is a protector, and he's always saving me. And this is not like tangible stuff, but that's where like my ebooks and my podcasts and all that, that's where I actually share how I put that into practice. But for people who have this mental illness, I want them to know that there's a higher power, there is someone protecting you. You don't have to call it Allah or God, or what, you can call it whatever. And maybe that higher power or that purpose is your family. Maybe you're living for them. Maybe you have like an amazing career that gives you purpose. That's your higher being, that's your higher calling. And I think with mental illness, when you have a higher calling that is higher than the mental trauma, the bipolar anxiety, it can squash it out, because you're not focused on this illness. You know that you have a reason to live, and you cannot let this illness take that away from you. You have a family to live for. You have a great career to live for. You have great goals. And when a person focuses on that purpose, I think that's the best way. That's the best tool they can have. Of course, there's like, work out and eat and all that. But that you can find anywhere, right? You can find that advice anywhere. But finding your purpose, that is personal to you. And I cannot tell you, oh, this is your purpose. You live that. You should do this. You should do that. I think that foundation you have to build yourself. So I would say that's the foundation answer. And of course, to go to learn how to put that into practice, the podcast series I'm doing right now is called Road to Revival. So in each episode, I share, okay, when I first got bipolar, this is what I did, right? This was the first step, and second, and third. And it's based on the stages of adaptation to having a loss. So when I was going to school, I'm trained as a teacher. So in one class, we were learning when parents have a child with a disability, what is the process that they go through? What's the first step? And what's the second? And it's usually, first of all, there's a denial, right? There's anger. How could I have this? And then it goes on to like anger and acceptance. So there are all those steps. So what I did was I focused on, okay, that denial, that anger, how did it look for me? What did I do about it? So that I go more into detail. So the short answer is find your purpose, right? It's a short, but it does take time. And the rest of it, I share more on my ebooks and podcasts and stuff like that.
The different stages of grief is what you're talking about. And even with anything, whether it's a disability, like you said, for a lot of parents, for example, their child is diagnosed with autism. They need to mourn the idea of a healthy child first before they can move on and accept their child as struggling with autism. And then, okay, what do I do about this? How can I move forward with this? And that's a really important aspect of actually moving forward with any diagnosis, I think. But one thing you mentioned is, unfortunately, in a lot of Islamic communities, people just say, you're suffering because your faith is weak. You're not praying enough. You're not religious enough. Maybe you brought this on yourself, and so that's a heavy thing for somebody to deal with when they're already struggling with their own anxiety, depression, or bipolar. So, what experiences have you had with that in either the Muslim community or even with yourself about how people can get around that?
Just hearing you say that, Nafisa, it's like, yeah, that hurt me, but I think the person it hurt most was my mom. Hearing I haven't gotten emotional before. So hearing that, to like being said to my mom that it's your fault, God is punishing you. You should have done this with your child. That's why she has this. You were too hard. You were too soft. You weren't religious enough. You were too liberal, quote unquote. You were too modern. All that garbage. My mom was like you could say the front line. You have frontline workers, the firefighters and the doctors. She was the front line who got all that garbage and that junk. And she kind of protected me from that. So I can tell you, yeah, it was horrible. It was really bad. But I think we need to do an episode with her so she can share, how she dealt with it, how it made her feel. And Nafisa, we were talking about the filter, how bipolar and mental illness can be a really good filter for weeding out the fake friends. Well, it did the same for her. So during that process, before that, she had a lot of friends. And after that, she found out, okay, that lady, that family, they're my true friend because they saw me, my family, my daughter at my worst, and they're still showing up to our house. That is true friends. And, I used to think that this experience is only me. Only I've gone through this. No one else could possibly know what is going on. And then I fell in love with one of the prophets the most, who was Prophet Ayub, or in English, Prophet Job. And we know the story that he had an illness, and at the end, people thought it was contagious, and he lost all his friends, and they wouldn't even come visit him. And it was just his wife that was left. So I'm like, hey, a prophet has experienced that. And he's like a friend of God. God has chosen him. So why not me? And I think once I saw that, I realized there were other people like me. I started connecting with them. So I kind of forgot your question, but I guess that's why.
I think you're very lucky to have a mom that supported you. A lot of people, unfortunately, that are going through a mental illness don't have the support of their parents, or their family is so mentally ill themselves, they cannot see how they can support them. So your mom sounds like an amazing woman, and she was strong enough to support you and stand up for you. But when the person that's dealing with all that is left to defend themselves, whether it's with their in-laws or with the community, that makes it really, really difficult. And I just want to say that reach out, get help, get the support. And that support doesn't have to come from your family and extended family members and your social circle. It could be somebody that's not that's not biased to your situation, that's objective, that can really guide you and support you. And if you're a Muslim, it doesn't have to be a Muslim person, a Muslim mental health professional that can help you, because bipolar is a universal disorder. It doesn't matter what religion you are. Somebody that's not from your faith can
Yeah.
help you, and so you
My
should go.
therapist is not Muslim. I just want to add that because a lot of people, the first thing they're like, "Do you have a Muslim counselor? Do you have this?" And I have to step back and say, just find a person who clicks with you, who get you. I'm sorry I cut you off, but I
No,
want.
that's so important, because I get a lot of people. They're like, well, like, for example, I'm the only Muslim psychologist that I know of in Arizona right now. And obviously there's no way I can meet the needs of everybody
Yeah.
in the community, nor do they all want to come to me. So don't stop with just, okay, we don't have any Muslim therapists, so I'm not going to go see a therapist. Go find somebody. It doesn't matter, because research has repeatedly shown that the best indicator of success in therapy is your connection to your therapist. So find somebody that you connect with and that they can guide you and support you.
I agree with that.
I'm glad that you had that experience, and you can speak to that they don't have to be Muslim. They just have to be knowledgeable about your disorder, and they can guide you.
Because it's like you need a doctor, right? And let's say you need a gynecologist. You go to them because of their expertise, right? You're not going to go to a Muslim electrician because you're like, I need somebody who's Muslim. You need, if you need help for your child, you would go to a pediatrician. So in those respects, we don't differentiate that, oh, we need a Muslim. And even with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he would consult people because of their expertise. Like when he had to flee Mecca, his guide was not a Muslim. He chose him because he knew he was reliable. He had a map. He knew where he was going. So we need to learn from that it's okay. You need to find someone who clicks. And like my therapist, I chose her because she's really into running and she's very spiritual and she's a teacher. So I'm like, hey, that checks all the boxes for me. And, I can talk to her anytime. I can text her. So I'm like, that's great. And I did try with a couple of Muslim counselors because in the beginning, I had that viewpoint. It has to be Muslim. They're going to lead me off my faith. They're going to tell me to do haram things. And when I found Muslim counselors, I'm like, I don't really like them. I don't click. Like I tried. I gave them a shot. But then I found a non-Muslim one and I was like, oh, I feel like I'm at peace. I can just sit and talk to you. So yeah, I totally get what you're saying. And I agree with that.
And I know when I worked in the schools, a lot of the kids, the Afghan kids that I worked with, didn't want to talk to me because of fear of being judged, too close of a connection. Maybe I would know their families. And so finding somebody that you can connect with, that you don't feel judged, you don't feel like the whole community is going to know about you. Find somebody that you can feel that comfortable with, so that you're not constantly on edge thinking, are they judging me? Are they questioning me? So like I said, I'm not going to be a good match for everybody. And so I encourage people, find somebody that you can connect with. Don't give up on therapy, because you can have some bad therapists. Don't ever give up on therapy.
I think you're a really good one. You're a really good one.
Oh, thank you. But don't give up on therapy. Just keep finding other therapists that you connect with, because that's really important. What advice would you have? I mean, besides what we just shared, as far as for Muslims, whether men or women, that are struggling with mental illness, and either they're wanting to look for a spouse, or just navigating the community and navigating through the stigma in a community, what advice would you give them?
Okay, I'm going to give you a weird advice, or like really crazy one, which is have fun with it. With the mental illness, have fun. What are you talking about, Saba? Are you crazy yourself? Yeah, I am. I adopt it as something fun. Of course, in the beginning, it's hell. You don't want it. You think it's a punishment. How could God be doing this to me? But it became normal to me when I met two people. So I was going to doctors, I was going to counselors, but then I reached out to an advocacy group. And they weren't Muslim guys. They were just supporting people with bipolar. So there I met two people. One was a guy, he had schizoaffective disorder. And obviously that's a little bit more intense than bipolar. And he said that now I'm at a point where I adjust my medication on my own, that I don't always need to go to a doctor or, to the hospital. They've given me permission that, okay, if you're not feeling well, then adjust it a little bit, then do that. And at that time I was like, how did you get to that point? And then I saw a nurse. I talked to her, and she said something that I still remember, which was, I asked her, I'm like, how do you deal with it? How do you have a job, like be a nurse and have bipolar? And she said, Saba, you just grow into it. It's like a cozy shoe that in the beginning it's like hard and stiff, but then you just keep wearing it and you grow into it. I was like, interesting. Grow into it. And I was like, I need to grow into bipolar. So I kind of changed my thinking about it. Right? I can say tips like, okay, get help, take your medication, work out. But I find that's everywhere. That you can read in a book, that you can read online. But I think the one advice I would give to my peers, like people who are going through the same thing, is reframe it. Don't see it as a punishment. Don't see it as a failing or a disability. See it as, as if you have an extra arm, right? And some people are going to laugh at you, oh, or you have an extra thumb, right? Oh, you're so weird. You have this deformity, well, whatever. And they're going to want to take pictures of it. Oh, let me show it to my friends like that. But you can use it to your advantage. You're like, oh, I have an extra thumb. I can do more with it, right? It's when you change your thinking about it, when you reframe it, when you see it something, I wouldn't say positive because that kind of sugarcoats the hardness and the suffering of it. But I would say that normalize it for yourself and see it as something that can work for you, not against you. So for me, I turned it into this podcast and writing and ebooks because I'm like, okay, I don't want to do this anymore. I can't do this. But then it comes back to me. I feel pain from it again because I still get sick. I still have episodes. My medication still needs to be adjusted. And every time that happens and I feel that pain again, I say, okay, what can I do with it this time? What can I learn from it? How can I make this fun? How can I make it easy for me? And once I do that, everything else, everyone else around me shifts because I'm at the center of it. So when I shift, then everything else shifts. And even above that, I'm saying I'm at the center of it, but deep down, I know Allah is at the center of it. And when I know that He's ultimately the one who's going to help me, and I rely on Him, I don't feel so powerless. I don't feel so weak. And I know there's someone watching me and protecting me. So that's the advice, that change your thinking about it. And Nafisa, the thing is, only you can do that for yourself, right? I can stand here and you can stand here and tell people that, we need to let go of this stigma. We need to get help. We need to seek therapy, but we cannot make anybody do that. And that's the hardest part, but also the biggest transformational part is that we can't force anyone to seek help for this. But when they do, when they stand up for themselves, their world changes. So I would say start with yourself and change your thinking, change your frame of thinking, how you see mental illness. It's not a disability. It's not a failing. You're not dumb. You're not less worthy. You are enough, and God chose you, this world, this nature, or whatever you want to call it. But there's a reason you have this illness. It is here to teach you. It is here to help you. But are you willing? Are you open to that possibility that you can actually make this your friend instead of a foe?
Beautifully said. I have anxiety runs in my family, and it's something I've struggled with, and I want to normalize it. But I love what you said. Make it work for you, because I see there's a lot of positives associated with anxiety and obsessive compulsive disorder. I actually have a YouTube video that is OCD
Oh, really?
is OCD the best disorder to
Okay, I'll
have,
watch it
and I
after.
believe it is.
Good.
And every disorder has, like you said, its own gift. How can you make it work for you? Like you said, you never would have had a podcast. You never would have had a platform.
Yeah.
You never would have had all these issues, because all of our struggles teach us how to be a better version of ourselves. Like you said, it also is guiding us towards that purpose you were talking about earlier. If we can focus on that, it's like, what is this trying to teach me? Like I'm trying to teach my daughter, even the weirdest abnormalities can actually help you stand apart. Like
Yeah.
Hrithik Roshan, the Indian actor who is the most beautiful man in the world, he has two thumbs, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I was
initially he
actually
was
thinking of him when I said that.
yes, initially though he was very embarrassed about it. And you
Yeah.
can see in the beginning they wouldn't show his fingers at
Yeah.
all. But towards the end, he said, I've been blessed with so much. I've been blessed with the good looks, with the nice body, with the fame and the fortune. This is just a reminder of bringing me back and making me
Exactly.
feel humble.
And I'll
And,
give you. Sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
I'll give you a tangible example because I have been sharing like heavy stuff, find your purpose and reframe. So I think one tangible thing is I'll give you an example of how I changed this view frame about mental illness. So I had a huge issue when I would get into an episode, I would just walk out. And for me, it was the best thing because I would get mental relief. I would feel like there's nobody around me. I wouldn't have any like tactile stimulation because when I would have an episode, like my sight, my hearing, like everything would be amplified. And I would find if I just walked out, it's like I was pressing pause. And my mom told me that I started this at the age of 3. Like I would just walk out of the house, and a couple of times my uncle found me on the other side of the town and he brought me home. So of course, when bipolar came, it just got worse. It got in the middle of the night, in the winter, going out without any shoes or jackets. I came to a point like, I can't keep this up. This is obviously, it is part of bipolar and I can't keep doing this dangerous thing. So I started signing up for races. So alhamdulillah, I've done like so many races, and I find that that was a way to reframe one aspect of bipolar. I knew that that's part of bipolar. I know that dangerous behaviors and just not thinking about others, because I find sometimes these illnesses can be very selfish. They make you just focus on how can I let go of my pain? I'm suffering. I need to do this, and other people need to do this for me. But the moment you step out and you say, okay, how is my behavior affecting my loved ones? How is my anxiety affecting my husband, my daughter, my mom, my dad, my friends? How is it doing it? How do they feel? And once I did that with the running, I said, okay, I'm just going to normalize it. So obviously, when you sign up for a 5K and you have a medal and the pictures, people are like, yay, wow, you did a great job. But they don't know, just like a year before, you were doing the same thing. But it was like they would call the ambulance and the cops, and like, how could you do that? So it's funny. You were doing the same thing, the same running away, but you just did it in kind of an acceptable way. Not just that, but in a healthy way. So it reframed, that reframing I'm talking about, it reframed a very big aspect of bipolar. And that's a very that's just one example. I've done that with many other things, but hopefully you can reframe dangerous aspects of the illness yourself, because it does have a lot of aggressiveness and a lot of things that are harmful.
Can you briefly give us an example of some of the symptoms associated with bipolar, whether you necessarily dealt with it or just in general? What are some symptoms associated with bipolar disorder?
Okay, so one of the classic mania ones, you'll have aggression. In the beginning, it's very like a frustration, as if like something's knocking on your window and it just keeps bothering you. Like I could tell you that in mania you have highs and lows, but that you can do a Google search and you'll find out. But from a person who has it, and maybe this will help you realize that you have it, which is in the beginning, mania starts off like very fun, right? You just want to go shopping. You want to sign up for all these events. You want to socialize. You want to go there. You want to write that ebook and you want to sign up for that thing. And it's just like, it sounds great, right? You have all this energy and you're like, of course, this is something great. I can wake up and I can do this and I can do that. So it starts off very fun. It's like you're going on a trip. You pack your bags and then you jump on a train and it's just slowly, slowly speeding up, right? And you're still excited, but then it starts speeding up a lot. And you realize that you're headed towards like a place you don't know. You don't know where you're going. And then you're headed towards a bridge, but there's no bridge, right? You're going to fall off. That train is going to fall off the cliff. And then you look out and it's too late to get off. It's too late. You're speeding up like crazy. And if you jump off, you're going to obviously die. So either you jump off or you stay. Both ways, you're doomed. So that's how mania feels like. You have, in the beginning, you have a lot of energy. But then after a point, you start to have delusions, not hallucinations, because those are more part of like schizophrenia. And the way delusions are different is that you have delusional thoughts. You are not going to actually see, a dog or a bear running after you, but your mind is going to think. It's going to have those delusional thoughts. You could be feeling stuff on your skin. And that took me such a long time. Like I didn't find that in any book. And I would ask my doctor, I'm like, do you know what that is called? They're like, no, I don't know. there's no snake on your skin, there's no bugs on my skin, but I'm like, I feel it right now. And they wouldn't get it. They're like, and I wouldn't find it in any books. But if you have bipolar, you're gonna have these sensations. I'm sure, Nafisa, you probably have a name for it. You've heard this before, but you'll feel stuff on your skin, and that again goes back to like the delusional. And I think for Muslims, even non-Muslims, there's hyper religiosity. So you'll start praying like mad, and you'll start, just reading Quran all day. And then there's the aspect which is so weird is hypersexuality. So you might be a very spiritual person, very reserved, and then within the Muslim community, you take off your hijab or just start talking about sex and drugs and acting out, something that's really out of your personality, something that you wouldn't normally do. So that's part of the mania part. And you can just do a simple search and you can find out the other general common symptoms. But I find when I explain how that feels, then that person can detect it in themselves. Depression, it of course it's the opposite, but the number one thing I find for people with bipolar is first you just kind of retract. Like you go in and you just want to be alone, you just want to sleep. Even though things are fine outside, everything becomes dark. It's like you put on these dark glasses. Or my sister calls me when I get depressed, I act like Eeyore from Winnie the Pooh. So if you can imagine Eeyore, that is I find what depression is like. You just want nothing to do with the world. The thing is, people, I've seen this a lot online. When I search up pictures of bipolar, there's a happy smile and a sad smile. I'm like, dude, what the heck are you talking about? There's no happy smile and then sad smile. What do we like, a switch? And then sometimes there's a brain picture and it's like, oh, switch on and off, bipolar. And then sometimes there's an elevator. Oh, I'm going up, I'm going down. I'm like, you don't have a clue. You don't have a clue of what it actually is. So I find it's more like a spectrum. So you have the manic side, you have the depression side, and sometimes it goes back and forth. It's not just one or the other. Sometimes I would have depression, and within the depression, there was aggressive behavior, but that aggressive behavior was turned towards me. So that would be like self-harm, overdosing, self-cutting, finding different ways to end your life. And Nafisa, it's crazy with that deep depression. You will not believe how your mind is so creative at coming up with ways on how to end your life. Like every second, I would have a different thought. Oh, you can leave like this. Oh, you can do that. You can do that. I'm like, where are you getting these ideas? I've never read about them. I've never seen them. I've never watched movies like them. Where are you getting these ideas? So that showed that this can happen to anyone, right? Of course, there's things that can predispose you, but depression overall, I find it's like harm geared like towards you. It goes inwards, whereas mania becomes like kind of outside you. Mania, everything around you changes, but depression, you kind of pull back, and that becomes really dangerous too, because then that leads to suicide. Just the basic ones, of course, is you start, feeling low in energy, low appetite. You just want to sleep. You'll have kind of memory loss. Everything becomes foggy. So those are just the general symptoms, but it does feel like that you start to turn against yourself and you just want nothing to do. And that purpose I was talking about, finding your purpose in depression, that disappears. I'll have a vision board and I'm writing all this. And then when I'm depressed, I just want to rip it up. I'm like, what are you talking about, Saba? How did you think you could do that? At that time, that's what it seems like. So take advantage of when you are well. So if you're listening to this right now, chances are you're probably in a good spot, right? If you can pay attention to this, if you were able to search this or subscribe, you are in a pretty good spot, or maybe not such a pretty good spot, but intellectually you still have that stamina. So I would encourage, right now is a very good time to find that purpose, the reframing, get help, support, reach out to people like Dr. Nafisa. This is a good time. There's no storm right now. And with COVID, it's weird. We think like it's really big, and which it is, but we kind of have an advantage, which is we're at home. We're not distracted by going out for movies or eating out or all these events. We have no choice but to stay home. So I find it's a very good time to kind of reflect and learn these symptoms right now so that when they hit, what they are.
Wow, beautifully said. Thank you so much for sharing your personal experience. I feel like that's way more powerful than reading it in a textbook. Even with myself, having gone through school and studying psychology and learning about anxiety, nobody explained my anxiety the way that I experienced it or the way other family members experienced it. And like you said,
Yeah.
eventually I came to the belief that it is a spectrum.
Yeah.
And not everybody's going to be on the higher end of the spectrum and maybe not even get diagnosed, but they are still struggling. And
Yeah.
the same thing with the bipolar, they might not have all the symptoms that a textbook has. And
Yeah.
if you're only looking at the textbook definition, you might not necessarily meet it. But
Mhm.
talking to other people, I love the idea of the support group, talking
Mhm.
to other people and finding support groups to help you understand it is so powerful and so important.
Yeah, I agree. It is.
Thank you so much for being here and sharing your thoughts. How can people find you? Tell us more about your podcast, how people can go on there and listen to your podcast and learn more about you.
Well, everywhere, just search for Mentally Fit Muslims. So on your podcast app, on Instagram, on YouTube, on Facebook, I keep that same name, Mentally Fit Muslims. Um, and I have a website, sabamalik.com, Sabamalik. That's my name. And I'm coming up with a website for the podcast as well. So I'm working on that. But just remember, it's not mentally ill Muslims, which I was like, I should call it that, mentally ill. But I'm like, why? So it's mentally fit Muslims. And I focus on the Muslims because I don't feel there's an advocacy group peer to peer support for them right now. So of course anyone can go on, anyone can learn from it. At the same time, I talk about like aspects that are really affecting our community, which affects other minority communities as well. So yes, mentally fit Muslims.
This just reminds me of when we started our website, Mental Health for Muslims.
Mhm.
We got a lot of pushback, like how
Yeah.
dare you shed the light on mental illness within the Muslim community. But our goal was to encourage people to understand mental health, not necessarily the illness. It's
Yes.
how to bring yourself to a mentally healthy place.
Yeah.
But every community has mental illness, and we need to understand that that's universal and not have shame around it. But
Yeah.
oh, I love the mentally fit Muslims. That's a good name.
Yeah, I love your website. That's one of the first ones I found. I think it was in 2008, around that time when I first started Googling bipolar and are there other Muslims like me? And that's when I found mentalhealthformuslims.com. And I love the platform. I loved reading your articles. I still get your emails. So that's how I reached out to you again. So yes, we need to focus on the health and recovery part. So thank you for having that valuable resource, Nafisa. I love it. You
Thank
guys
you.
should
Thank you
all
so
check
much.
it out. Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate the support and the feedback. And all of us are doing our part in helping to reduce the stigma and encourage people to seek help. There's no shame in it. And let's normalize mental health.
Yes. Yes.
All right. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. It was really fun. It was really fun.
What an amazing story Saba has. Being diagnosed with a mental illness can be stressful enough, but then having to feel shame and fear because of that stigma can be overwhelming. Saba's story gives me hope that the more we talk about mental illness and the more we normalize it, the more we take that power of shame and fear out of it. Saba also has shown us that when you feel empowered and confident, no one can take that away. She sees her diagnosis as a blessing, which empowers her to share her story with others. The more she talks about it, the more others can feel comfortable talking about their own struggles. One takeaway from Saba's interview for me is her sense of humor about her bipolar. She says, make your disability fun and actually see the funny side of the bipolar, which can have a profound impact on our perspective and create a shift in our thinking about mental illness. If you want to learn more about Saba, please visit transforminganxiety.com/12. If you're interested in taking better care of yourself and prioritizing your mental health, please check out my free self-care PDF guide. To download your guide, please visit transforminganxiety.com/self-care. If you're enjoying the Mental Health Break podcast, please don't forget to subscribe so you'll always know when there's a new episode. Also, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, please feel free to give us a review or a 5-star rating since that'll help others find the podcast. I can't wait to see you here next week. Same time, same place. Bye for now.